Hello, my name is Nathan. I'm 33, a software engineer who mostly works from home, and I live alone on the fourth floor of a brick apartment building in Seattle's Capitol Hill. The place is small, quiet, and usually cold. After the divorce 2 years ago, I stopped fighting the chill. I just let it settle in the corners the same way the silence settled in my chest. It was the first real week of winter when the fever hit. I'd felt it creeping all day, the dull ache behind my eyes, the heaviness in my limbs, the way the code on my second monitor started swimming. By 9 o'clock, I was shaking under 3 blankets, teeth chattering so hard I couldn't even hold a glass of water. 102.4, the thermometer read. I remember staring at the number like it belonged to someone else. I hadn't been sick, really sick, since the marriage ended. I guess my body finally decided it was time to catch up. I must have fallen in and out of sleep, because the next thing I knew, the room was darker and the clock on the stove glowed 1:14 a.m. There was a knock. Soft, but definite. 3 measured taps. I thought I was dreaming. Nobody knocks on my door. Not at 1 in the morning, not ever. I dragged myself up, head pounding, and shuffled to the peephole. Through the fisheye lens, I saw a woman in a long wool coat, hood dusted with fresh snow, holding a paper bag and a stainless steel thermos. Elena. From the 5th floor, the art teacher. I hadn't spoken more than 10 words to her in the 3 years we'd lived in the same building, except for the handful of Saturdays 6 years ago when she gave private drawing lessons to my daughter Lily before everything fell apart. I opened the door a crack, chain still on. My voice came out like gravel. Elena? She didn't look surprised that I remembered her name. You didn't answer your phone, she said quietly. Mrs. Alvarez on 2 said she heard coughing all evening. I brought some things. I meant to tell her I was fine, that I didn't need anything, but another wave of chills hit and I swayed against the doorframe. The chain rattled. Without asking, she reached through the gap, unhooked it, and stepped inside. The apartment smelled like cold takeout and unwashed laundry, but she didn't seem to notice. She set the bag on the counter, shrugged off her coat, and moved with the calm efficiency of someone who had taken care of people before. I stood there uselessly while she filled my electric kettle, pulled a sleeve of ginger tea from the bag, and found the only clean mug in the cupboard. You should be in bed, she said, not scolding, just stating a fact. I managed. My throat felt like sandpaper. She guided me back to the couch, pressed the back of her hand to my forehead, then my neck. Her palm was cool and steady. Still burning up. She unzipped the bag again and took out a digital thermometer, the kind that beeps. Under your tongue. I obeyed like a child. The kettle clicked off. She poured steaming water into the mug, added honey from a small jar, stirred, and handed it to me. The ginger stung, but it was the first warmth I'd felt in hours. The thermometer beeped. 102.7. She frowned, just slightly. You need acetaminophen and fluids, and sleep. She rummaged in the bag again, shook 2 pills into my hand, and watched until I swallowed them with the tea. I expected her to leave then. Instead, she took the throw blanket from the back of the chair, draped it over my shoulders, and sat on the coffee table directly in front of me. Close enough that I could smell the faint trace of turpentine that always seemed to cling to her skin. You're shaking, she said softly. I'm okay. You're not. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. She reached out, brushed a damp strand of hair off my forehead, then let her fingers rest against my temple. The touch was clinical and intimate at the same time. Listen to me, Nathan. I looked up. Her eyes were dark green, flecked with gold, and they held mine without flinching. If the fever comes back tonight, she said, so quietly I felt the words more than heard them. Come find me. 5th floor, door at the end of the hall. I'll leave it unlocked. She paused, her thumb tracing the edge of my cheekbone once, like she was testing whether I was real. I'll be waiting. The air left my lungs in a rush that had nothing to do with sickness. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but nothing came out. She stood, gathered her coat, and walked to the door. Just before she stepped into the hallway, she glanced back. The light from the stove caught the side of her face, the loose strands of hair escaping her ponytail, the quiet certainty in her expression. Then she was gone. I sat there a long time, clutching the mug, the blanket still around my shoulders, her words looping in my head louder than the fever. I'll be waiting. I didn't go to her that night. The acetaminophen did its job. The chills eased, the heat in my skin slowly dropped. But I didn't sleep either. I lay on the couch staring at the ceiling, listening to the building settle, the radiator clank, the faint sound of snow against the windows. Every so often I looked at the door, at the narrow strip of hallway visible through the crack I hadn't fully closed. 5th floor, end of the hall. I told myself it was the fever talking. I told myself she was just being kind. I told myself a lot of things. None of them explained why my heart was still racing long after the thermometer read 98.6. The next morning I woke up on the couch with sunlight stabbing through the blinds and the fever gone. My mouth tasted like ginger and metal, but my skin was cool. I sat up slowly, half expecting the whole night to feel like a hallucination. The empty mug on the coffee table, the folded blanket, the faint scent of turpentine still hanging in the air told me it wasn't. I showered, changed, and stood in the kitchen holding the stainless steel thermos she'd left behind. It was still warm. I told myself I was just being polite. Nothing more. I climbed the stairs to the 5th floor. The hallway smelled like old wood and someone's cinnamon candle. Her door was cracked open, soft jazz drifting out. I knocked once. "Come in," she called. Elena was at the small kitchen island, sleeves rolled high, hands covered in cerulean paint. A half-finished canvas leaned against the fridge, a woman with dark hair and hollow eyes staring out a window that reflected nothing. She glanced over her shoulder and smiled, not surprised at all. "You're upright. That's progress. I brought your thermos back." I held it out like a middle schooler returning a borrowed pencil. She wiped her hands on a rag already more color than cloth. "Keep it. I have 3. She tilted her head toward the canvas. "Want to see something I probably shouldn't show anyone?" I stepped closer. The woman in the painting looked like Elena, but younger. Trapped? The eyes were the same green, but they were looking for an exit that wasn't there. "That's me at 38, she said quietly. The year I realized love could feel like a locked room. I didn't know what to say. She saved me from having to find words. "Tea?" She was already moving, filling the kettle. "I make a decent chai on days I don't feel like being an adult." I nodded. She motioned to the stool across from her. I sat. She talked while the water heated, not in the careful way people usually talk about hard things. She talked like someone finally allowed to use her own voice. "He didn't hit me," she said, measuring cardamom into a pot. "He just made sure I never forgot who held the key to every door. My schedule, my friends, my clothes, even the way I signed my name on checks. After he died, I kept waiting to feel free. Instead, I just felt hollow." The kettle clicked. She poured, strained, added milk and honey. 2 chipped mugs. She slid one across the island. I wrapped my hands around it. "I get hollow," I said. My voice cracked on the second word. After Sarah left, I kept thinking the worst part was over. Turns out the worst part was realizing I'd let someone rewrite my code without even noticing. Elena studied me for a long moment. "We're both running debug on broken programs, aren't we?" I laughed, surprised I still knew how. "Yeah, except I have no idea what the original source looked like." She raised her mug. "To buggy humans." We drank. After that, the visits didn't need excuses. Tuesday evening, I showed up with a bag of cinnamon rolls from the bakery on Pine. She answered wearing an old husky sweatshirt and paint-splattered leggings, hair twisted up with a brush. She took one look at the bag and grinned like a kid. "Sit," she ordered. "I'm teaching you how to ruin a perfectly good canvas." She handed me a brush and a scrap of watercolor paper. I painted a crooked coffee mug. She painted the steam rising from it into something that looked like hope. Thursday night, she knocked on my door holding 2 bottles of red wine and a pizza box. "I have parent-teacher conferences tomorrow, and I refuse to grade another still life of a plastic fruit bowl sober." We sat on my floor because the couch was covered in laundry. She kicked off her boots, tucked her feet under her, and told me about the student who painted his grandmother's hands because they were the only part of her Alzheimer's hadn't stolen yet. I told her about the bug I'd chased for 6 hours that turned out to be a missing semicolon. We laughed until the wine was gone, and the room felt too small for everything we weren't saying. Sunday morning, I woke to a text. Bring coffee, I'm out of brown. I showed up with 2 large dark roasts and found her on the fire escape, wrapped in a blanket, sketching the skyline. She scooted over without a word. I sat. Our shoulders touched. The city was still asleep. She flipped to a new page and started drawing my profile without asking. I let her. When she finished, she tore the sheet out and handed it to me. Keep it, she said. Proof you were here. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my pocket next to my heart. We never talked about what we were doing, we never labeled it. But every time I left her apartment, the hallway felt shorter. Every time I came back, her door opened before I could knock. One night in early December, I found her on the couch asleep, sketchbook open on her lap, charcoal smudged across her cheek. I covered her with the throw blanket, turned off the lights, and sat in the armchair watching the rise and fall of her breathing until the snow started falling outside the window. I didn't kiss her. I didn't need to. Something deeper than skin was already happening. I just whispered into the dark, so quietly she couldn't possibly hear. I'm glad the fever brought me here. But maybe she did hear, because in her sleep she smiled. The first week of December, the building started putting up Christmas lights in the lobby, cheap multicolored strands that flickered like they were already tired of the season. I was coming home late from a client call, coat collar turned up against the wind, when I saw the black Mercedes parked crooked across 2 spaces in the resident lot. It didn't belong. Every car here had at least one dent or faded bumper sticker. This one looked like it had been waxed an hour ago. I recognized it anyway. I'd seen it once, maybe twice the year Elena's husband died. Same plates, JCN 844. I told myself it was nothing. People visit, old friends show up, but my stomach tightened as I climbed the stairs. 5th floor hallway was quiet except for voices leaking through Elena's door, low, fast, angry, hers and a man's. I slowed. I shouldn't have, but I did. Still playing the grieving widow? The man was saying. 5 years, Elena. The will's settled. The house is sold. You don't need to hide in this dump anymore. Her reply was ice. I'm not hiding. I'm living. There's a difference. A humorless laugh. With what? Art classes and frozen dinners. Come home. Your mother asks about you every Sunday. I have a home. The door opened suddenly. I was still 10 feet away, keys in my hand like an idiot. Julian filled the doorway, tall, broad, expensive coat open over a suit. He looked exactly like the kind of man who never heard no. Early 50s, silver at the temples, the kind of face that smiled in boardrooms and made people nervous. His eyes landed on me and narrowed. Tough guy from 4, he said, voice dripping amusement. Thought you only fixed leaks, not broken women. Elena appeared behind him, arms crossed tight, face pale. Julian, stop. He didn't look at her, kept staring at me. Let me guess. She told you the sad story. Poor controlled wife, finally free? She leave out the part where she liked the cage when it came with a black card? I felt heat crawl up my neck, but I kept my voice flat. I'm just the neighbor. Sure you are. He stepped closer, lowered his voice so only I could hear. She collects projects, kid. You're the newest one. When she gets bored, she'll toss you out like the rest. Elena moved between us. That's enough. Julian finally looked at her. Something ugly flickered across his face. Ownership, maybe regret. You're making a mistake. No, she said. I made those for 15 years. This isn't one. He stared at her a second longer, then brushed past me hard enough to knock my shoulder. Didn't apologize. The stairwell door slammed behind him like a gunshot. Silence rushed in. Elena's hands were shaking. She pressed them together like she was praying. I'm sorry, she whispered. Don't be. I stepped closer. Who is he, really? She swallowed. Julian was Christopher's best friend, executor of the estate. He thinks... Her voice cracked. He thinks because he handled the money, he gets to handle me. I reached out slow enough that she could pull away. She didn't. I tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. He doesn't get to do that anymore. Her eyes filled. She blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. He knows which buttons to push, always has. I took her hand. It was cold. Then let's change the locks on those buttons. She laughed once, wet and surprised. You make it sound simple. It can be. She looked up at me, searching my face like she was trying to find the lie, didn't find one. That night, she didn't ask me to leave. We sat on her couch, knees touching, the Christmas lights from the street blinking red, green, red across the walls. She told me the part she'd left out before, how Julian had shown up at the funeral offering comfort that came with terms, how he still sent flowers on her wedding anniversary, how every time she started to feel safe, he found a way to remind her the past wasn't buried. I listened. When she finished, the room was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I'm tired of being afraid, she said into the dark. Then don't be, I answered. Not tonight. She leaned her head against my shoulder. I felt her exhale, long and shaky, like she'd been holding that breath for years. Outside, the Mercedes was gone. Inside, for the first time since I'd met her, Elena wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. She was just here, with me. After Julian left, Elena disappeared. Not physically. She still came and went. I heard her footsteps overhead, saw her silhouette against the curtains. But emotionally, the door stayed closed. No more late-night tea invitations. No text that just said, "Bring milk" or "Come see what I ruined today." My phone stayed silent. The hallway between our floors felt longer than the entire building. I told myself I understood. She needed space. Julian had rattled the cage she thought she'd escaped. And old ghosts are loud. I gave her 3 days, then a week. I worked, I ate, I ran code until my eyes burned, trying not to listen for her door. On the 9th night, I found the envelope in my mailbox. Small, heavy watercolor paper, edges rough like she'd torn it from a block. No stamp, no address, just my name in her handwriting. I waited until I was inside to open it. 2 teacups under a single lamp. One still steaming, one already cooling. The light was warm, golden, the kind that makes shadows soft. On the back in black ink. If you still remember what I whispered that fever night, knock before I lock my heart again. I didn't think. I grabbed my coat and took the stairs 2 at a time, 5th floor, end of the hall. The light above her door was burned out. The corridor was darker than usual. My pulse hammered so hard I felt it in my teeth. I raised my hand, hesitated 1 heartbeat, then knocked. 3 times. Firm. The chain rattled. The door opened 6 inches. She stood there in an old gray sweater that slipped off one shoulder, hair loose and wild. No makeup, eyes red-rimmed but bright. For a second, she just looked at me like she was confirming I was real. Then the door swung wide. The apartment smelled of orange blossom tea and turpentine. A single lamp glowed in the living room, the rest in shadow. She didn't speak. She stepped aside so I could enter, closed the door behind me, and leaned back against it. The click of the latch sounded louder than anything. "I thought you'd forgotten," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I tried," I answered. "I'm not very good at it." She laughed once, shaky, and the sound cracked something open in my chest. She crossed the room, picked up a fresh mug from the counter, and poured from the pot on the stove. Steam curled between us. When she handed it to me, our fingers brushed, and she didn't pull away. I took 1 sip, set the mug down, and reached for her hands. They were ice. "Elena." She looked up. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something fiercer. "I was locking everything again," she said. "The doors, the windows, the parts of me I thought were safer in the dark. Then I realized the darkest place was the one without you in it." I slid my thumbs across her knuckles. "I'm not him. I'm not Julian. I'm not anyone who ever asked you to be smaller." "I know." Her voice trembled. "That's what terrifies me. Because if I let this in, if I let you in, there's no going back to the version of me that knew how to survive alone." "Good," I said. "I don't want you to survive. I want you to live." The tears came then, silent, sliding down her cheeks. I caught them with my thumbs, cupped her face, and felt her lean into my palms like she'd been waiting years to be held without conditions. She rose on her toes and kissed me. Not careful, not testing. A kiss that tasted like orange blossom and salt and every unsaid thing we'd carried for weeks. Her hands fisted in my coat, pulling me closer, and I wrapped my arms around her so tightly I felt her heart hammering against mine. When we broke apart, we were both breathing hard, foreheads still touching. I'm scared, she whispered against my lips. Me too, I whispered back. She took my hand and led me to the couch. We didn't turn on more lights. We sat close, knees touching, fingers laced. The city hummed 5 stories below, muffled by snow. I kept thinking, she said into the quiet, if I opened the door again, I'd have to be brave enough to never close it. I lifted her hand, pressed my lips to her wrist where the pulse raced. Then leave it open. I'm not going anywhere. She turned, curled into me, head on my chest, and for the first time since I'd known her, Elena let herself be held without bracing for the moment it would end. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and relentless, covering everything old in something new. Inside, the lamp burned steady, 2 teacups cooled side by side, and the space between us finally completely disappeared. March arrived with a soft, reluctant thaw. The snow turned to slush in the gutters, and the offer came on a Thursday morning. A 3-month contract in Portland, senior architect role. The kind of job I'd been chasing for years. Good money, good team, the next real step. I stared at the email for a long time. Then I closed the laptop and climbed the stairs to the 5th floor. Elena opened the door wearing one of my old hoodies, sleeves pushed up, paint on her cheek. She took one look at my face and knew. "Tell me inside," she said quietly. I followed her to the kitchen. The sketchbook I'd been filling for weeks lay on the table. I'd drawn her every way I could remember, laughing over burnt toast, asleep on the couch with charcoal still in her fingers, standing at the window watching snowfall. The last page was blank except for a single line in the center. "I came to you when I was burning. If you ask me to stay, I will." She sat, opened the book, and turned the pages slowly. Her breath caught on the drawing of her in the kitchen, steam rising from the kettle like a promise. When she reached the final page, her fingers rested on my words. I waited. She closed the book and looked up. The green in her eyes was brighter than I'd ever seen it. "I won't ask you to give up something you've worked for," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "I've spent too many years watching someone shrink their life to fit someone else's. I won't do that to you." My chest ached. "Elena." She stood, walked around the table, and stopped in front of me. "I'm not keeping you with guilt or tears." She took both my hands, pressed them over her heart. "But I need you to know this. The night you knocked on my door with a fever, something in me started breathing again. And every day since, you've been the reason I haven't stopped." I started to speak. She shook her head. "Go to Portland, take the job. Build whatever you're meant to build." A small, fierce smile. "But when you're ready to come home, this door will never be locked. Not for you. Not ever." I pulled her into me. She came willingly, arms tight around my neck, face buried against my shoulder. I felt her inhale like she was memorizing the way I smelled. "I'll be back every weekend," I said into her hair. 3-hour drive. I've done worse for less." She laughed once, wet and perfect. Stubborn man. Only when it matters. We stood there until the light shifted and the room turned gold. Then I kissed her. Slow, deliberate, the kind of kiss that doesn't say goodbye, it says, "See you soon." 2 days later, I loaded the car. She walked me down to the street, hands in the pockets of my hoodie she'd refused to give back. The sky was the color of wet concrete, but the air felt lighter. At the driver's door, I stopped. "I'll call when I get there." "You better." I brushed my thumb across her cheek. "Still waiting?" She leaned into my hand, eyes shining. "Always." I got in, started the engine, and pulled away. In the rearview mirror, I watched her standing on the curb, arms wrapped around herself, snowflakes starting to fall again. Every Friday night for the next 12 weeks, I made the drive north on I-5, 3 hours each way, sometimes in rain, sometimes in silence, always counting the miles until her building came into view. Every Sunday evening, I drove south again, her kiss still on my lips, her voice in my ear. "Come home when you're ready." On the last weekend of May, the contract ended. I packed the car one final time, but I didn't head south. I took the familiar exit, turned onto our street, and parked in the same spot I'd left empty for 3 months. She was waiting on the front steps, hair loose, wearing the same gray sweater from the night I knocked. When she saw me get out with both hands full of groceries and a stupid grin, she stood slowly. I walked up the path and stopped one step below her. "I'm home," I said. She didn't speak. She just reached for me, pulled me close, and held on like the world might try to take me again, and she wasn't letting go. Spring had finally won. The snow was gone, the air smelled like cherry blossoms from the tree across the street, and the fifth floor door stayed open all night. I never had another fever, but every time the weather turns cold, I still climb those stairs carrying ginger tea just in case. And she's always waiting.